Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 65. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and I am fired up because the NBA playoffs they're here. I don't know. Wait, do they call it the play-in? Is that technically the playoffs, or is it technically the regular season, or is it just its own thing? I don't really know. But bottom line is there are basketball games with high stakes going on this week, and we will break all that down with a very special guest. But first, be a pro and win with DRF Sports Pro. Introducing DRF Sports all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is $825 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With so many big sporting events here, it's the best way for you to make some money and have fun while doing it. DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. And as mentioned, we are here for a full-on basketball NBA playoff preview. We're talking play-in games. We're talking future markets. We're talking, do you believe in the Nets, who are still somehow such heavy favorites to win the East despite being in the play-in tournament? We got line breakdowns. We got so much to discuss. Of course, we got Matt joining us, but we had to bring in some other big guns as well. As we bring in our guy, Drew Dinsick, he'll be here as well to break it all down. And luckily for y'all, that starts right about now. All right, it's that time of year, and I will say one of my favorite times of the year. But because of the NBA playoffs, we had to bring in the big guns. So I had to bring in Mr. Drew Dinsick. How you doing?
Oh, man, I couldn't be happier. This last weekend was a little overwhelming from a sports standpoint. We had Kentucky Derby qualifiers, Masters, racing was popping on top of the finale of the regular season for the NBA. It was a lot going on, UFC even. It was a very, very busy sports weekend. And now the dust is settling and we're looking ahead at the NBA playoffs. And that's really going to dominate my handicap for the next month and a half, 2 months. Is this is perfect. One of my favorite times of year.
And obviously our normal guest here, we got Mr. Matt Russell joining us, but this is great because we're going to get two different angles here talking NBA basketball. And of course, Drew is an analyst from NBC Sports, Bet the Edge podcast, and the Deep Dive podcast. And Matt from giving his whole grain goodness on this pod twice a week for the most part. As long as I keep begging him to come on, he keeps blessing us with his info as well. But we'll start here. Drew, you obviously got us ready for the Olympics, and you did such a great job there, but we know that your bag is really with the NBA. You've recently featured on some NBA broadcasts. Let's start there. What's that experience been like for you?
Oh man. Well, it's exciting that the sports betting aspect, they continue to weave it into the actual product of the game itself. At some point you would think that, most of the people who really care about who are going to tune in for especially regular season games at the end of the season, they're mostly just tuning in because they're betting on it. And so you need to have some, way to appeal to those folks. And it's cool that they're trying some stuff out. Excited to see what next season looks like, because I do feel like the NBA is still on the come up. It's still growing. It still has room to grow and capture more customer interest. And the betting handle was probably the biggest this year that they've ever had, at least measurably, even beyond the fact that, we have more states than ever that are legalizing it. It seems like interest continues to grow. So it was great to be part of that.
That's awesome. And I want to get your take first off as we deep dive into the playoffs and obviously the play-in tournament. Still something that's pretty brand new, but I just want to get your take because I feel like there's a lot of people discussing the play-in tournament, and I feel like there's extremes between people who absolutely despise it and hate it, because you might have some teams that have terrible records but are 2 wins away from making the playoffs. But on the other side, like people like myself, I love it because in my view, it's like it made more of the regular season matter. And I'm here for that. But which side are you on here?
a way in the camp of this was a genius innovation. This was absolutely brilliant. And that key is what you just said, which is that the last 2 months of the regular season were way more meaningful in terms of like just being watchable basketball. And some of it was teams chasing those play-in spots. Some of it was teams finagling seeding. Like in another lifetime, a team like the Nuggets, who cares if you're the 6 or the 7? Well, they desperately wanted the 6, right? And so you were getting specific performances out of them to try to avoid that. And then the flip side of, a team like the Raptors who clawed their way from at the All-Star break, it was like Raptors Nets is almost certainly your 7-8 game. And they worked their way into the 5 seed to get a clean, into the playoffs and, cleanly without having to play their way in. That's awesome. Yeah. Anyone that is against it, literally, they don't like basketball. I think they don't like entertaining or betting. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. They tweaked the lottery seeding so the tanking is a little subdued, and they tweaked the play-in, which made the end of the season matter so much more than it used to. And it really did give it, what is otherwise a long slog of a season, 82 games. It gave it a huge shot in the arm, huge benefits already. And I think realistically, the only argument against it is people who only want to see playoff basketball and they just want to get there sooner. Yeah. And so you don't even care about regular season basketball. Your opinion is invalid.
I totally agree. They've also been very lucky the last couple of years because you had the Warriors heavily involved in the play-in last year.
Yeah.
A lot of talk about the Lakers for a while before they bowed out, but you have the Brooklyn Nets. So let's start there in the East, because obviously we've been talking about how crazy the Eastern Conference has been in terms of a betting market here. Matt and I have been talking about that for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. Now you have Brooklyn in the 7 seed as 8-point favorites in the first play-in game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Speaking of teams that, the play-in really affected them, they've dropped drastically to close the season. But Brooklyn as an 8-point favorite at home. Before we get to the game, I want to talk about just looking at where Brooklyn is from a market standpoint at plus 320 to win the East. What do we think about that number when they have to win a game to even get into the playoffs still?
Yeah, it's an insane number. And I'm not saying it's an insane number because I'm not saying that there's no chance that Brooklyn wins the East. It's an insane number because their path now is they're going to have to defeat the Celtics round 1, the Bucks round 2, and then presumably the Heat round 3. And those 3 series, they're going to be dogs in all 3 series. And it doesn't take an advanced math degree to know that if you parlayed 3 series prices at plus money, you're going to get like 15 to 1. You're going to do much better than plus 320. And in general, if you are a new-ish bettor, even if you're somewhat experienced in this, it still is worth kind of thinking through, why would you place a future on a team? The only reason you are placing the future instead of betting that team round by round is because you think that there could be chaos elsewhere and that the other upsets are going to give you equity on your position. And the reality is both for Celtics and Nets right now, assuming that the Nets get the 7 seed, they're going to have to do it themselves. They're going to have to eliminate all of the other competitors on their way to a title. And so there is no mathematical reason to get involved betting either of those 2 futures, considering what they're going to have to do to actually realize a payoff.
And this isn't even like the NCAA tournament, right? Where maybe the other team that you're playing in the next round might lose. Like maybe we have a St. Peter's, Kentucky situation. Like Boston's already sitting there. They don't even have to go through the motions and play a game, right? Like this isn't, when you talk about the potential chaos elements, like there's a non-0% chance, right, that the Nets lose here, but there is a 0% chance that the Celtics aren't in the next round, right? And so that you don't even have that like glimmer of hope that your road gets paved a little smoother, if you will, right? Like it's not going to happen. This is what it is for the Nets.
Yeah, Nets are going to have to do the hard work themselves. And for that reason, you can't get involved in the futures market. And honestly, I think this play-in game is going to be competitive. I mean, the Cavaliers were ravaged by injuries down the stretch. They're still not fully healthy. Jared Allen's he's a hugely important piece for them defensively. He's not going to be available, but they're still a tough out. They have a dynamic 1-2 of young players between Garland and Mobley. There are huge questions swirling about the Nets' ability to play team defense. And so, the idea that this is going to be a walkover runaway and that the market is fair at 8.5, I would side with the dog in this one.
Yeah, I mean, 8 points is a lot to just lay in an NBA game, period. I don't really like being about that life, so to speak. But I will say, though, with that said, I'm still sort of penciling in Brooklyn and thinking about them towards the next series. So one of my questions there is kind of, and maybe I'll throw this to you, Matt. What do you think about Brooklyn in the next series against Boston? What would that number be, or what would be a fair price in that series?
Yeah, well, when I look at this, I'm comforted by what Drew says as far as liking Cleveland, because I'm the same way. Because when you talk about team defense, you want a team, good team defense to cover a big spread. You and I talked about whether it's football or basketball, right? The team can hang in there if the other team is allowing them to hang in there. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that the Celtics at least are going to be able to do is play team defense a lot better than Brooklyn is. And so I look at that and I go, okay, I don't know. Drew's more of the expert as far as like what a fair price necessarily is going to be. You mentioned, Drew, that you think that the Nets are going to be underdogs in this. To me, it's a little bit more of a coin flip. There might be sort of a minus 110, and you never know when it comes to the Nets, right? Like we're seeing how crazy the market is from a future standpoint at plus, as Shell said, plus 320. It wouldn't be the craziest thing I've ever seen if the Nets are, minus a little bit here in this next round. And I think maybe that opportunity, exists to take the Celtics here. So Drew, like, what is your fair price? Like, what is your expectation for an opening here on this series price?
Also, Drew, before you answer that, though, I want to throw something else in. Does Ben Simmons' possible availability affect that one way or the other? Just in terms of like who knows what you're going to get from Ben Simmons, but they are floating out now that he could be back in the first round. Does that affect the line, or should we be anticipating a bit of a line movement depending on his availability?
I guess it's a higher likelihood that they're going to bring him in than if it had been Philly, Brooklyn round one. Then I think you could have basically put a fork in Simmons for that round of the playoffs. But no, in seriousness, I'm not counting on Simmons making much of an impact. Mm-hmm. If he is even 80% of what we saw from him, before the weird playoff, before the weird playoff failure, if he is 80% of that player, I'll be surprised. And I actually don't even know that I love the way that he fits with the current construction of the Nets roster. Okay. He's a non-shooter, period. You can only really have one of those players on the floor in a competitive series. And the Nets have some other non-shooters that they're going to want on the floor. And so there's not, specifically without Joe Harris, Ben Simmons doesn't really make sense on the Nets anymore. Mm-hmm. You can put a pretty dynamic lineup out there with Kyrie, KD, Joe Harris, and Simmons. That quartet right there. If you can get one other shooter in the mix, you have a really, really, really strong closing five. But without Harris, with Simmons at 75, 80% of himself, I don't really know that the Nets are any better than the team we have seen when KD and Kyrie have been healthy and playing, dynamic basketball together. Like that is their ceiling to me, which means, you go back in time, we had a Boston, Brooklyn, head to head on a Sunday that was really competitive basketball. Brooklyn played about as well as I thought you would ever see them play with that lineup.
Yeah,
they were 6-point dogs in that game in the Garden, and they lost. And it was not like a fluke loss. Like they got beat. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of cemented in my mind that the market is going to make the Celtics a meaningful favorite in the series. I think the Celtics are probably going to be small dogs in Brooklyn, and meaningful favorites at home. I would expect to see like a 5.5 point spread in favor of Boston in the Garden, 2.5 point spread in Brooklyn. And I think realistically, your series price is probably going to be Boston minus 160-ish. I think that's about how the math works out there. But we are getting a little ahead of ourselves, and I don't want to say that something weird is going to happen and they're going to work, because it's not like the Nets have a better path if they go in as the 8th seed. Like, they need to take care of business and punch their ticket. So it's, let's assume that they ultimately do get through. I think Celtics are going to be favored to the tune of -150, -160. And I think my fair price for them, I would make the Celtics say 6 points better in the Garden and pick them in Brooklyn.
Okay.
So I think I would be on the side of the Celtics if that's the way the market manifests.
Which, by the way, like that alone, and comparing it to the Eastern Conference betting market, right, is kind of all you need to know about how wacky the Eastern Conference betting market is, given the fact that the Celtics are, plus 450-ish right now, compared to the Nets being plus 325. Like, those roads are converging, assume, right, if we assume that the Nets are going to win this next game, right? Those, and again, non-zero chance that they might not, but like the market is already sort of indicating that they don't like the Celtics as much as they like, the Nets, which is why that just is wrong, right? Like, especially if we're going to assume that the Celtics are this favorite, which again, I don't necessarily disagree with Drew as far as what the correct price should be. It's just, I'm kind of going to need to see it here. If the Nets win, then people, sort of lining up here to bet on Kyrie and Kevin Durant. I mean, Kevin Durant alone, right? I mean, we all respect Kevin Durant to the nth degree here, right? So it's like, let's see how the actually thing shakes down here. But I think there's probably going to end up being a bet there on the Celtics for me on that series. I'll
tell you what, it'll be even more fun is you're going to get totals that start in like the 220 high range. And just series, under. Those games are going to end up being way physical down the stretch. You're going to have a lot of KD, Kyrie, ISO going down to the end of the shot clock. You're going to have the wing defense, Brown and Tatum offer, is going to make it tough for those guys to get their looks all the time. Like, those are going to be games that expect to land in the 220s that land around 200.
And the one lesson learned from last year's playoffs too, I don't know if anyone caught, I think Kevin Durant was on with JJ Redick. They did kind of like a crossover interview session, but they were talking about last year's playoffs and the Bucks game plan of everyone. And Durant just kind of smiled. So he didn't really answer the question, but you got the point. JJ Redick was kind of laughing at the Bucks game plan. Apparently seemed to be, well, we'll let Kevin Durant do whatever because he won't be able to beat us by himself. And it's like, he almost did, right? And it's like, in this instance, though, you're going into a different coach and a different just team, right? And like the Boston Celtics, that's a team built on defense. As you mentioned, we know that that's how they've been able to turn things around. They have like the bodies to throw at Kevin Durant and just at least make it a little more difficult for him. So I'm, as someone who had been a Nets backer for the majority of the season, now that we're here, like into the playoffs and like about to have that go down, the matchups are just not good, whether it is Miami or Boston, right? If they even make it in. So totally looking forward to that. But again, Drew, you make a good point. Might be getting a little ahead of ourselves. Is there still more play-in games to talk about before we get to that playoff? Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say about the other play-in game, right? As somebody who comes in here, who knows how to bet, who knows how to sort of, read a market, et cetera, I couldn't tell you anything about the Hornets. Right, beyond a couple of players. So I don't know the matchups nearly as well. Obviously, a lot more familiar with the Hawks from the run that they had last year. So there's a lot of people who are like me who go, okay, like the Hawks made it to the conference finals last year. Like, we have a little bit higher expectation of the Hawks. Then the line opens -4.5, the Hawks at home. It feels a little bit short for maybe I'm not giving enough respect to the Hornets here. So I'll put that to you, Drew. Is that the case here? Or do you think that people like me who just don't think that highly or haven't gotten enough Hornets in their lives in the last couple of months are just maybe overlooking this team? Or is this Hawks all the way here all right, we were at a real high last year from Atlanta's point of view, and then, obviously stumbled throughout the season to be in this spot. Is this all right, we're going to pick things up, right back where we were from last playoff and that experience factor and all of those sort of nebulous things? Or, what do you make of this number?
Well, only one of these teams had a play-in and won, and it was the Hornets. So, to the degree that you've been, to the degree you've been in a one and done situation and they survived, I guess. Although did the Hawks beat they beat the Sixers in 6, right? They didn't have to go to game 7. I can't remember. Maybe they did.
Yeah, that's right.
So they might have been
in game 7.
That was a game 7. Okay.
I think it was a road game in Philly, right? And everybody assumed that Philly was
a 7-game series.
Yeah,
okay. So they have been in the one and done single elimination type of environment, and they know what that feels like. So that's positive. I think in general, though, the Hornets are a very well coached team. They make great in-game adjustments. And they where they lack in general is they don't have a great rim protection, but Atlanta's not really killing you there anyway. So I personally think that this is going to be a competitive game. This is like a live bettor's dream game, because with both of these teams, no lead is safe. If either of these teams is up by double digits, it's almost an auto fire on the opponent to come back. There will be some wild swings in this one, because both teams are capable of allowing and going on 10-0 runs. And so this will be a really, really fun game. At the current price, I would lean Hornets. I think I make it 3.5. But it's not strong enough to get involved pre-flop. If you do get involved pre-flop and you are going to live trade this one, though, I think you almost certainly have to look for Hornets out of the gate, and then hope that they take a lead, and then get some Hawks at plus money, and then try to shoot for a middle.
Okay. Do you like the over in that game then, Drew? 236.5.
It's pretty high.
That is pretty high. That's pretty high.
I think the first quarter, first half overs are probably fair. Because this is single elimination, and because I'm expecting it to be back and forth and relatively close, I think you could see a fourth quarter grind to a halt. So I think, again, another live trading opportunity. You could bet the over pre-flop, let it get up into the 240 range if it's 60 to 60 at halftime, and then come in on a live under when we get to the fourth quarter.
Do either of these teams have a hope in HE double hockey sticks of competing with the Heat in the next round? Do you have an idea what that series price is going to be, or is it just going to be one of these deals where it's like minus 1,000 and you have to almost ignore it?
So that's again jumping ahead a little bit. We're just sending the Cavaliers packing without really giving them a shot, but I think you're probably going to see either of these teams be a small dog in Cleveland in the 8 playoff. Right. And then any of those three teams are going to be in the plus 400-ish range against the Heat. Yeah, I should say
I include the Cavs as any of these teams.
Any of those three, whoever gets the 8, everyone but the Nets. If whoever comes out of that and gets the 8, I think the market has the most respect for the Hawks because of their playoff success, like you mentioned. Sure. But I don't think you're going to get better price than 3-1 is about as short as I could imagine any of these teams being against the Heat.
Okay.
Yeah, to be honest, of those three teams and seeing that number at 4.5, I think that is a little high. Like if I'm making that bet before the game, I'm definitely on the Hornets. But yeah, very interesting game. And I do think it'll be close down the stretch. Definitely looking forward to watching that. And that's what I'm talking about. The play-in tournament, a game like that, like let's really break it down. If you're just generic NBA dude turning it on a random night and you see Hornets, Hawks, it's not really going to catch your attention. But if you're telling me single elimination playoff game, let's go. Like I'm in on that. You could give me whatever team you want. You could bring out Sacramento and you got me here. Right. But let's go to some playoff matchups that are already set here. We got Chicago at Milwaukee. And we know that Milwaukee has had a lot of success against Chicago. That might be why they rested everyone to kind of punt the end of the season here on Sunday. But what do you make of this matchup in terms of, is there like kind of a games kind of line that you're looking here? Because a lot of people are bringing out the sweep talk just because of the success that the Bucks have had against the Bulls this season, but also the fact that the Bulls have just been struggling down the stretch and have struggled all year against good teams.
Yeah, the series price has gotten away here pretty quickly. And I think it's warranted. The Bulls have pretty weak defense, particularly protecting the rim. And the Bucks with their closing lineup of Giannis and Brook Lopez, as well as, Middleton and Drew Holiday, like pick any fifth player. They are going to be exceptionally tough for Chicago to stop in the fourth quarter, which means your game states as you go into the fourth quarter. Any game that the Bucks are leading, they're going to win. Any game that is kind of 50-50, the Bucks are going to win. And any game that the Bulls have a meaningful advantage going into the fourth quarter, they might hold on. And I've seen a lot of the Bucks lately, particularly ramp up against tier one competition. They've ramped up and closed gaps in the fourth quarter. They are playing championship basketball level right now. And I would be surprised if this has a gentleman's sweep kind of a whiff to it.
Yeah.
And I think what do you see in -2.5 games for the Bucks has already been bet out to -185.
Really? I'm seeing a -155 right now. Should I be jumping on that before?
Yeah, I think that's going to keep going up.
Okay, you guys talk for a while. I'm going to hop.
I mean, that's moved a lot already today. I think it's going in one way. That's going one way.
The Bulls, we talked about it on this pod a lot. Just as the season progressed, you notice just the drastic difference in the numbers between the Bulls playing good teams and then playing bad teams. And now, I mean, you're talking about Milwaukee, the defending NBA champs. I mean, in that instance, stats don't lie in that sense, right?
And you and I have talked like for weeks here, right, about how the Bucks, as we've gotten towards the end of the season, it's one of those deals where, we won the championship last year. Like, what did we care about November, December, January, right? You get into late March and April, especially when the competitive element of, 2, 3, 4, like where should we fall in here? They've really massaged that nicely. So you could see when they played the Sixers a week ago or so, right? You can see them bringing up when they needed to bring it up, which is not something that we've seen from some of these other teams.
I guess the only thing I can add, the market is a little hot on the Bucks in general, but this isn't a series you can capitalize on that.
Yeah, I got
right.
You.
So because of that reason, I think as a bettor, my mindset is, boy, I hope the Bucks absolutely take care of business and just beat their brains in. And then nobody really catches on that there's a little bit of a surplus right now on them in terms of value. Because, if Boston has a knockdown drag out series with the Nets and gets through and the Bucks cruise 4-0, 4-1, you could get a tilted series price there to bet on Boston, which would be cool.
Okay.
So is that one that you've sort of got circled then? If it's Brooklyn, is it the same sort of deal or, less so? I know that. Asking a lot of Brooklyn.
I think so. I mean, I think in general, the market is too high on the Bucks right now.
Okay.
But they got a good path. I mean, it's good because the Bucks. I would be most worried about the Bucks running up against the Celtics and the Heat are the kind of two foes that scare them. I mean, even the Nets actually. All three of those teams match up decently well against them because the Bucks give up just an absurd amount of open looks from three. And if you can get hot shooting from three on a given night, you're going to potentially win that game. And I would say the Heat qualify as a team that could pull that off. The Nets qualify as a team that could pull that off. Celtics to a degree could, but the Celtics really desperately need Robert Williams back if they're going to ultimately be competitive in that series against the Bucks. Yeah. And at this point, because that's a round 2 series instead of a potential Eastern Conference Finals, that doesn't work out great for the Celtics.
Drew, Shell and I talk about how like the thin line here when it comes to coaches, whether it's the NFL, college basketball, right? Bill Self wins his second national title. I didn't love much of what was happening in that championship game from a coaching standpoint for him. He's obviously, a 3-pointer away from maybe not winning one the first time around and would be, very easily could be a 0-time national champion. We talk about Andy Reid getting off the schneid and winning a Super Bowl with Kansas City. Now, all of a sudden, Andy Reid is in the upper echelon when we spent 20 years of our lives making fun of Andy Reid and the various coaching decisions that he made. So am I sort of off base to think we're doing that a little bit here with Budenholzer in that he's won a title and now all of the stuff that we were talking about Coach Bud going into the finals last year, like we were tearing our hair out. Look what happened when they, almost lost to the Nets when it was literally just Kevin Durant out there. Shell mentioned hey, just let Kevin Durant do what he wants out there. They can't beat us that way, and they almost did. So is part of that, the idea that maybe you're looking to fade the Bucks, is that still some latent, you're not buying into Budenholzer and his adjustments or lack thereof?
Yeah, a little bit. It's a good question for me personally, because I've been really critical of him for a long time. And I for sure sat around before last year's playoffs and was like, Budenholzer, I could see being the reason that the Bucks never get it done. Yeah. And ultimately he got a lot of credit for that run last year. I wasn't really one of the people that was willing to admit I was wrong about it. And a lot of it is because I looked at that run and I'm like, well, you had the best player in the NBA go utterly nuclear in the finals. Like, yeah, of course you win the title. Like, who cares what your adjustments were? Oh yeah, Budenholzer got the hell out of the way. Congratulations.
Right. And by the way, get in line with all the other NBA coaches who have had that sort of level of success with certain players. Right.
Well, it's like the Lakers want Nick Nurse right now, and it's like we do realize that without Kawhi Leonard, they don't win. Right. Like we realize Nick Nurse is a good coach.
Yeah, it's he'll elevate your team of young tryhards.
Yeah,
maybe even this year to a series win. But no, I think ultimately I have not seen much from Budenholzer that's like, oh man, this guy is changing the game.
The fact that as you mentioned,
he's getting the heck out of the way.
Well, the fact that you mentioned like who was on that Nets team last year, and James Harden has an injured hamstring. He's barely limping up and down the floor. They won't just go at him in a pick and roll every single time down the floor. Yeah. They let him stay on the court, and they didn't double team Kevin Durant, which those two things will never understand the coaching decision. So totally get it. But I sort of mentioned Nick Nurse as a segue here, as we got another series that we know is coming down to, actually going to happen, the Raptors and the Sixers. And a couple of things, Drew, just to give you a little backstory.
Well, I was going to say, let's clear the deck here. This is our guy's wheelhouse. I'm going to turn the tables here on you, Shell. Right? Like this is your spot. No one knows more about the Raptors than you do. No one has less belief in the Sixers even before this got lined up, right? You have been anti-Sixers for basically ever since the big trade. Give me the case for the Raps. I'm feeling like this is getting almost a little too hot here, where I'm hearing people liking the Raptors more than I ever kind of thought they were going to. The price here, about plus 150 on the Raptors. I know you're betting it, but are you a little bit worried here now that the block might be getting a little too hot here on your Raps?
It's tough, right? Because my thing is I understand the numbers, and I'm learning the numbers and understanding the numbers a lot more, but I still watch a lot of basketball, and watching a lot of basketball, there's too many 6'9" dudes that Nick Nurse has to throw at James Harden and just make his life difficult. James Harden hasn't been playing as well this whole entire season. He's a step slower. And now you're telling me there's an assortment of Precious Achiuwa, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, right? Like, that's 4 dudes that they can pick at any opportunity to say, hey, we're going to go at James Harden. And so to me, when you look at the Sixers, it's either Joel Embiid has to go for 40 a night and James Harden still has to put in work, and they have no depth. And plus, we're going back to coaching. I mean, if there's one coach that we know that doesn't really put up his best work in the playoffs, it's Glenn Rivers, PhD. Right? So there's a lot of things just not in the favor of the Sixers. And I thought from the time that we were talking about, just the trade, I was on the fade the Sixers bandwagon. The Raptors have surprised me down the stretch with how well they've played. And I still think it's a really, really close series. I like the Raptors to win, but it's still a really, really close series. And I think the block is getting a little too hot right now, as if like, oh, Raps can win in 5 or Raps can win in, like, it's not going to be an easy series. It's going to be a close series. I mean, we've already seen, I guess, as close as a series could possibly get between these two teams the last time they played in the playoffs, and it came down to 4 bounces. But
speaking of Kawhi,
right. So I still like the Raptors in this series, but I don't like how the snowball effect is happening right now. And you're hearing more and more people, I think, go over to that side as if the Sixers are just going to roll over and Doc Rivers is going to be the Lakers coach next season. Like, they're already signing the contracts right now. It seems kind of weird to me.
And Drew, this feels like it's happened in the last 2 weeks, right? Because people were fawning over the new look Sixers there when that first started. And it feels like in the last week or so, it's been kind of I don't know if maybe it's because the Raptors weren't lined up to face the Sixers, and because they've gone up, Sixers have gone down, that this matchup is sort of like new, whereas we didn't really have to think about this matchup maybe a week and a half ago. So where are you on this, man?
No, the why is a lot easier than the what will happen. Sure. The Sixers, after the Harden trade, were expected to, run away and hide in the East, at least from a standing standpoint. They fell into the floor. So everybody's been underwhelmed with what they've done since acquiring Harden. And the flip side is true of the Raptors. People were like, are they even going to get in? They got 7-8. They'll lose that. They may be playing in the 8 to, get into the 8-1-8 matchup. No, they played great down the stretch. They secured their seed with a 5. And along the way, people all kind of, that's a team nobody wants to play. They've kind of got anointed as that, kind of plucky underdog, and they happen to get matched up against a favorite that no one wants to back. And so it's a perfect storm of, this is now a market price where you're basically getting a decent EV to back the better team, probably. So the question is, do you want to do that? And I think all of Sheldon's points were real. Doc Rivers, James Harden, not guys you can count on in a best of 7 series necessarily, particularly as it gets down to the business end of that series. My general feel is you're going to get value to bet on the Sixers in game 1 at 4.5. That's going to go up, I think, as we get closer to tip off. The major problem with the Sixers, besides the fact that Harden might be washed up, is that they don't really have a ton of depth. Depth starts to matter a lot less in the playoffs because you're not going to, there's not going to be a lot of minutes from the, guys like Reed and, Shake Milton's not going to be out there, presumably. I mean, if the Shake Milton does go out, does take the floor, then, maybe this is the Raptors to lose, but, certainly the games in Toronto are going to matter because we know, we know that Thibault's not vaccinated. He won't be available. So they're going to be thin there and on the road. My guess is that Sixers probably win games 1 and 2. You see this series price drift in their direction based on just defending home court. And then whether or not the Raptors have a chance comes down to if they can defend home court and in games 3 and 4. If Nick Nurse has some tricks up his sleeve and has some specific advantage matchups he tends to capitalize on, he needs to do it in game 2. They need to win that game, and they need to come back to Toronto and hold court. And then at that point, you may see the Sixers, who don't love playing with each other and don't love playing for Doc and don't really, don't have a ton of depth. They could bow out softly. I could see that happening, but that you kind of need a lot of things to go right there. So I generally get the feeling that games 2 and 4 decide this series one way or the other. And Philly can hold court in game 2 and get a win in game 4, then maybe this is a short one for Philly. If Toronto wins game 2 and can hold court in game 4, then they're probably looking at a series win.
I do love as well how you explain that, Drew, just in terms of one thing I feel like people just coming into the NBA playoffs sometimes need the reminder to not drastically swing from game to game. So if the Sixers were to win game 1 in a blowout, I'm still sitting here hitting that double down on the Raptors to win the series at a better number. Right. But and I'm saying that from the standpoint of, you can't really the game to game stuff that you can take away in the NBA playoffs is very there's not much to take away at certain points is more so the point that I'm saying. Right. So if you firmly believe, I would not be deterred if the Raptors were to lose game 1 in front of a crazy crowd in Philadelphia that's fired up and juiced up after a full Saturday of just getting ready for that 6:00 game. You know what I mean? So I love the playoffs for that reason and seeing the adjustments and all that too.
Which even at the best of times, by the way, right? The Raptors have kicked away game 1s in series, even at home, even as double-digit favorites to the Orlando Magic, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
To me, and again, if there's a better series for this, feel free to sort of let me know. This is one that, relative to the odds, I think you can sort of, as Drew laid out, kind of script it in a way where, to me, Raptors 4-2 in an exact series price at like a plus 500, plus 475 type of a thing, like really feels like it's got a better chance to win versus, trying to script out a series elsewhere, right? I mean, we can sometimes in the NBA playoffs do all right, the better team's going to win the first two, then like somebody's going to win at home in game 3. And then Drew said, there's going to be a gentleman's sweep in there. Historically, that's kind of a thing. But when there's two closer matchup teams, you get is this team going to win every single home game? Is this team going to win every single road game? In this case, I just think that the Raptors can get one of these games in Philadelphia here. And, you guys are talking about a team that's not very deep in the Sixers, and having a guy who's going to be top 5 in the defensive player of the year ballot, like not playing, like that's another guy. Like if they're already not deep, guys, and they're going to lose a potential award winner in some way, shape, or form. And as Shell says, like the Raptors are certainly deep enough to take away James Harden as best as people can. Again, he might be washed up. That might be the type of thing that happens if you don't really take care of your body over the course of a decade of an NBA career. I don't know, just a theory. So I just look at this and I go, yeah, like Raptors winning this back at home in 6 games feels like something that has more of a chance in happening than maybe the standard odds. You kind of just go, okay, this is the series price. This is what, underdog in 6, what that price should be, et cetera, et cetera. I just think underdog in 6 here is a little bit more likely than maybe the odds are indicating here based on sort of how those odds get created.
Yeah, no, I like it. I just think it's not Brooklyn. Sorry. I just think Philly is a good matchup for the Raptors. And so much of the playoffs just comes down to matchups. And for Embiid, it's like, yeah, they don't have a real true center to stop them. But I mean, I still need to see Joel Embiid have that. And I hate saying this because it's somewhat unfair, but the Shaq type playoff where, okay, I got to put this team on my back and go for 40 and 20 night in, night out. Like, I know that sounds crazy. But sometimes
he did the regular season where he stayed healthy, and like we were looking for that, right? That was sort of the first test. Like, can he play an entire season without everybody wondering, if he's going to be able to make it through an entire season? So I give him credit for that. But you're right. The playoffs have been an issue.
Let's quickly switch over to the West here, and let's start here. We got the Clippers and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Timberwolves favored by 2.5 in that game as we head back to discussing a little play-in action here. Matt, I want to ask you though, what do you like about this series or this game? Sorry.
I don't know. I'm betting the Clippers here, and I see this line go up to 3. Like, I don't trust the Timberwolves. And again, haven't watched a ton of Timberwolves basketball necessarily. And obviously I know, no Kawhi, all of that sort of thing with the Clippers. That's why they are where they are. But like, this is a team that was able to get things done last year in the playoffs by evaluating, problems with the Utah Jazz, for example. I think they probably aren't they able to do that against the Timberwolves? I know they're on the road here, and that's why we're getting some, a few points here. Drew, talk me out of this, man. I like the points here at the Clippers, maybe even a little money line. What about the Timberwolves am I supposed to like all that much?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of, pushback on that, other than to say the Clippers, for whatever reason, start monumentally slow.
Yeah.
And
they don't have time to do that.
they don't have time to do that. And they play a high variance style. So to a degree, if this is to work out for them, they need to be hot and they need to not dig themselves a giant hole. So those are keeping me off of the Clippers. But in general, I don't see a ton of margin of difference between these two teams in their current form. So, no strong reason to stop you from making a bet on LA here. Ultimately, I'm at 2.5 is my fare. So probably not going to bet this one.
It might be one of those things where if the Clippers are right, then an alt line like Clippers -5 type of a thing. Like, right. Like, I don't know that the Clippers are going to lose this game by 2 points. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Where if it's either they're either there or they're not. And so they might win by 10 or they might lose by 10. Like, I don't know that this game is going to go down to the wire, so to speak. So maybe I just kind of, keep my unit down here a little bit and my payout higher and take a shot here with the Clippers that they're going to be ready to go in this play-in playing game.
I'm wishing to see if there's Drew, maybe you could help me with this. Is there a line I could find over under the amount of dumb things Pat Beverly is going to do in this one play-in game, just because going against his Clippers squad, and he's going to be like, in all seriousness though, he has changed a bit of the identity of the T-Wolves, right? Yeah, and obviously Anthony Edwards now has been playing a lot better, and they just kind of like, Karl Anthony Towns seems tough, which is a weird thing for me to like say. And I know it's not, that doesn't have anything to do with betting per se, but I'm saying like, it's not the same T-Wolves team that we're used to, that we've seen last year. And obviously their coach is in their second year, a little bit more of a runway. Like, I know on paper, I would normally lean in this scenario saying, hey, Clippers, especially with Paul George back. But I don't know. I like the T-Wolves in this game. And it sounds weird for me to say, but that's just where I'm at with this one. I do want to say, though, the winner gets the Grizzlies. What is the fair price? Like, is there a team that you would like better against the Grizzlies, or does it not matter? No shot.
T-Wolves have been, I think of all the teams that I've bet in the NBA this year, I bet a lot of game by game, very little Timberwolves, very little Clippers. Like, I just have never really had a hugely off-market opinion of either of these teams.
I got you.
So as a result, I didn't watch a lot of their games.
Totally fair.
I don't really get the Timberwolves. Like, they had some times in the season where they were like, oh man, this might be a top 10 team. And then they had some stretches where it's like, okay, they're not beating anyone that they should be competing with, and they are barely beating the Dregs, which is kind of the way that they've been lately. It was ugly win against the Rockets, ugly wins against a couple of their opponents who were resting a lot of players, and then some gross losses in a mix where they were trying to get out of the 7th seed and get into the 6th seed when the Nuggets left the door wide open. So I agree. Kind of, I don't have a ton of trust that the Timberwolves are going to give you much in that playoff matchup against the Grizzlies. And in the Grizzlies, I don't want to slander them and say that they're not for real, that they're not a real contender. Like, they're a really, really, really good young team. It's just, it would catch me by surprise if a team kind of makes their first playoff run and is that without any speed bumps.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they're a year away from their big run.
Yeah, right. This feels very, it feels like they have the nucleus that the Warriors had in the years before the Warriors went and dominated the NBA. And so if you were like buying long-term stock in a team, Grizzlies are an easy, correct choice number one, just because in 4 or 5 years they could be running the West. But this year, I think it's more important for them just to get a playoff series win, get their guys some playoff minutes as they get their young core some experience together, figuring out how to solve a playoff series. But that's not easy. Like, it's definitely not going to be easy for the Grizzlies, I don't think. And I certainly am not going to get involved with them in the future standpoint. I think ultimately you're probably looking at a 4-1 win against the Timberwolves, maybe 4-2. And then probably like a 6 or 7 game series loss to the likes of the Warriors would be my feel.
I like that. Wednesday night's action. We got the San Antonio Spurs and the New Orleans Pelicans. Pelicans favored by 5. Is there any bet on this game? I know we're talking about teams that we just mentioned, 2 teams that might not be at the top of everyone's league pass list night in, night out. And now we're going to the Spurs and the Pelicans. I will say, from my angle, 5 points might be a little too high, but if I was forced to pick a side on these 2 games, I would lean Pelicans, just because I think with CJ McCollum, he's kind of added, more legitimacy to a team that probably needed a vet around or a grown up around to like.
I got to object instantly. We were all totally there for the CJ McCollum fiasco from last year. Have we already forgotten CJ McCollum going full Carlton, stealing the ball from Will Smith and just winging it off the back of the gymnasium last year against the Nuggets? Have we just forgotten about that instance? McCollum was a train wreck, and I can't get over it there. That's all I'm going to say about this entire thing.
I guess Yeah, I do remember that, and I had some. I got my. Yeah, I took some L's in that series for sure. I
Yeah,
thought the Blazers were a lot better team than they ultimately ended up showing us in that series.
Yep.
I don't know that reflects on my opinion of what McCollum is going to do in this particular. In this particular matchup, but I can tell you that that in the opposite of the Clippers and the Timberwolves, I did bet a ton of Pelicans games and a ton of Spurs games this season.
Oh,
almost all of my Spurs bets were on the Spurs. Like I had this team rated better than market for at least 75% of the season.
Okay.
Ultimately that worked out well for me. It's not like I had a bad taste in my mouth where I'm like, God, I could never get them properly rated. And I lost a bunch of money betting them. Like I think in general, when they had rest advantage, particularly, they were a team that was pretty dynamic and pretty, they had a couple players really emerge that went way under the radar. So I think the Spurs probably come through here. The Pelicans, they covered against the Trailblazers as their last win. Congratulations, I guess.
Don't bring that up. Please don't bring that up.
Oh, wow. I forgot about that.
Yeah. 17-point favorites. The market said that the Pelicans, 17 points favorites better than another team.
So, Drew, you bring that up, and we didn't tell you to do that. We should probably sort of loop you in here. We didn't tell you to bring that game up. And what a random game to bring up, by the
way. That's what makes it tough, because like you got to come up with a market rating on these teams. And you're like, well, when was the last time they put out an honest effort? Well, it was that game. It's like they were 17-point favorites. All right, anyway.
Yeah, and that was my case on literally the last episode that we did. And I was just like, the 17 and a half, like it cannot be, right? Like this Pelicans team cannot be a 17 and a half point favorite. And like, yes, the Blazers are tanking and all of that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, they can accurately tank without losing by 18 points. And they're going to have guys out running around on the court that are at least trying to be NBA players and all of that sort of thing. So long story short, we talked about how, listen, like maybe they end up losing by 30, but like you absolutely cannot bet on the Pelicans minus 17 and a half. And of course the Pelicans won by 30. And I looked a bit of a fool after that one. 1 game sample size, folks, 1 game sample size. Everybody calm down out there.
Yep.
Not my best.
But yes, ultimately though, the Pelicans have some huge, glaring, obvious deficiencies. They're lucky to be here. It took exactly the right kind of Lakers implosion combined with their schedule softening down the stretch to get them into this position. And I think the Spurs get them.
So Drew, sort of shifting down the road here a little bit here in that area, so to speak. The Suns, you talked about the Bucks being, they're okay. I'm going to look to fade them a little bit down the stretch here, or if you get the right matchup. Is there anything to do one way or the other with the Suns? I mean, not even in obviously the first round. Maybe that's just what's the phrase, right? Suns in 4. But anywhere down the line here with any of these teams, is there any way, shape, or form that you're going to be either fading the Suns, or are you just paying the prices here to back some of these potential Sun series? Maybe not in the next round when they're a minus $1 billion here. Or is there ever a circumstance where, you're like minus 1,000? Sure, I'm in for, a quick 10%, not that would be the price for this, but is there any circumstance in which you're like, you know what, I don't care that it's minus 1,000. It should be minus 2,000, minus 3,000. Like, do you ever make that bet, or is it just a matter of like, okay, well, we'll wait until there's an actual competitive series coming here? Yeah,
I mean, the Suns are the only team across all of the NBA that I could say you could feel that strongly about.
Right.
As glowing as we were about the Bucks against the Bulls, minus 1,200 for a series price is pretty generous there.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was Suns minus 1,200 against any one of these 4, then I'm not really blinking. I'm saying, yeah, Suns are the right call there. Suns are a deep team. They're extremely well coached. That's the team that I bet on most all season long. I have 20-1 on them to win the title from preseason. So I'm a little bit biased and brainwashed here.
You might be the wrong guy to ask.
Right guy to ask. Is there a time to go against them, and what would stop them from winning the Western Conference? The only answer is a fully healthy and functional Warriors team in a Western Conference series.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, the Warriors play them very, very tough. They're just not a great matchup for the Warriors if Steph is fully healthy and if Klay Thompson is doing anything. Then if Draymond Green is back to where he was in the fall, like he hasn't been as good. So there are a lot of things that have to go right for the Warriors to reach their peak. But if they do, then that's going to be a tough out in the Western Conference Finals.
And so Shell, maybe you can expound on this a little bit more. I brought up the other day, like the Warriors' mileage at this point with those guys. If Draymond's back and he's good to go, and Steph and Klay and all of that sort of thing, it takes a lot out of you to go to four straight finals and these long playoff runs that they've had, and obviously like surgeries are nothing to joke about as far as your long-term injury mileage and that sort of thing. So Shell, as we get into the Warriors here in a Warriors Nuggets series, I know you're not all that enthralled with the Nuggets here. Are you worried at all about the Warriors? Like, is minus 240 too high of a price for you here, knowing that, again, we trust the Warriors in this way because we've seen it before, but again, this is starting to add up here a little bit as far as the injuries and stuff are concerned.
The biggest thing in this series is as long as they have Draymond, right? Like, you need Draymond to at least bother Jokic and make his life a little difficult. He's still going to get his, obviously, the way that team's set up. Obviously, he has such a high usage rate and he's so good. You're not going to stop him or slow him down, but at least you have Draymond there to make life a little difficult for him, right? And the one thing, I know you guys talked about Jordan Poole, and we talked about him from the start of the season. I remember we did a preview pod talking about Jordan Poole.
That's right.
As sixth man of the year, and just basically just talking about like the blow up season that he might have. That's one of the things where it adds a little more, in this series, just to get through the first round. Cool. Give Steph a little more time to get healthy. Give Klay some more games under his belt as he continues to come back. Like, that's where, they've been really slow with bringing along Kuminga, but like having those youthful guys in your lineup, that's what they kind of need here. And I think that's this series where it's basically just Jokic, right? Because they're still really injured. This series is kind of good for that. Can you get Poole some reps? Can you get Kuminga some reps? Can you get those guys a little more acclimated to the playoffs? That gives Steph a little more time to, get back into the swing of things, because you're going to need Steph to be Steph and Klay to be Klay if you're going at the Suns. So, this matchup for them in the first round, whereas, if you're playing a healthy Denver Nuggets team, that's a different conversation. But the way that the Denver Nuggets are currently put together, the Warriors should be able to take on this challenge, even with, Steph not being 100% or Klay still working his way back. Drew, what do you think, man?
I thought you framed that all perfectly. I would agree with all of that. And if the cavalry was coming for the Nuggets, you're a little nervous if you're the Warriors.
Yeah.
But the cavalry is not coming. And this is a one-man show. And you have a dynamic piece defensively in Draymond Green to really make life hard on him. In fact, Looney plus Green, like, that's a good, like, Looney through a first half, getting physical, use some fouls. And then, Draymond Green in the second half, particularly in the fourth quarter, if it's a close game, like that is ideal. There's no one else in the NBA who has that recipe to really make it tough for the Nuggets. So this was a disastrous matchup for the Denver in general. I think
it's 4.5 too short then for game one, Drew.
I think so.
I think so too.
Let me look at my number. I think I'm like at 6.
Oh, really? I could see your number necessarily sort of matching up maybe more quote unquote accurately with the market or in line with the market than even maybe the sort of, extra handicap, right?
What I get, I think there's definitely some uncertainty about availability and player availability on the Warriors side, and players, how fit some of these guys are going to be.
Sure.
Which makes it a tough market to bet into. But I think generally you're looking at a Warriors get through in 5 kind of a scenario here. And it's a bummer too, because Jokic is the best player in the NBA and rightful MVP this year. But I think his playoff run's going to be pretty short.
Yeah. You talked about player availability, and I think that's a good segue into the series matchup between the Utah Jazz and Dallas Mavs. Is Luka, we're not really sure his full health. And I mean, as the playoffs start, you never really know anymore. That's when like the full-on lies start coming up here. But you look at that first game, and Utah is favored by 2.5 points in that game. And I'm kind of looking at that and thinking, okay, that must mean that somebody knows Luka's a little banged up, because wouldn't Dallas at home, right? Like wouldn't Dallas at home be at a much better number? Like Luka, obviously this is the most obvious statement of obvious statements. If Luka is banged up and injured, the Mavs have no chance, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it stinks too, because I think the basketball collective breathed a sigh of relief that Luka Doncic found his form of the back half of the season. Mm-hmm. He started off this season overweight, burned out after a ridiculously hard shortened season combined with the Olympic run, and then right into this NBA season. And it was like, man, guy looks broken. I hope he doesn't, I hope he finds some kind of form. Well, he found it and then some. He was playing at an all NBA level over the back third, especially. He was absolutely dynamic. The team around him fits him and his strengths well. And it was set up perfectly, like, okay, whoever they draw in round one, sorry, but Luka's finally going to win a playoff series. You're the sacrificial lambs. And then to draw the Jazz, it's even better, because the Jazz look like they're ready to quit and implode this team on their own. So it was a perfect storm for Dallas to get a playoff series win. And then in kind of, while nobody's paying attention to the NBA, last day of the season, Luka goes out with the calf injury, which best case scenario is a week recovery. Worst case scenario, he may be out for the first 4 games of the series.
So is this 2.5 then, like the full Luka is out? Because Shell and I talk about Lamar Jackson is, and we're not sure if he's going to play, and they, the market kind of goes halfway, where it's like, well, it should be 7, but we're going to go 3, and then they announce he's out, and it's like all of a sudden the Bears are favored, at home to the Ravens. So is this 2.5 like the full version of, in your mind anyway, like if it was actually announced, this would be the number?
This says 80-20 he's out to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Okay. Like, if it's official, how much more does that go up?
A smidge. It gets nudged a little bit. Okay. But Luka available, Dallas would have been 3.5, 4-point favorites, I think.
Yeah. And then you got the series line too, right? Where you're going, okay, well, maybe he misses 2 games, maybe he misses 3 games, maybe he misses 4 games. If he was healthy, just to give everybody sort of a framework for what it should be, what would the series line be if this hadn't happened to Luka? Knowing right now that it's plus 140 for the Mavs and minus 160 for the Jazz, or at least where I'm looking at right now. Like, what should that have been?
Yeah, minus 200 range.
Okay,
would be my guess. And ultimately, at this point,
66% type deal.
Yeah, for sure. At this point, you're probably hoping that the Jazz manage to win game 1 and game 2, and that Luka comes back for game 3, and you can scoop like a absurd price on the Mavericks to win the series down 0-2 on the road. Like that would be the dream scenario. Because if if and when he comes back, the Jazz are in deep, deep trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Fair
the
enough.
Jazz, that team is, they're about ready to go here. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But Drew, this has been awesome, man. And honestly, was already excited for the play-in tournaments and for the NBA playoffs to kick into high gear, but you just up that even more. So thank you totally for joining us here on the pod. And you can find Drew at whale_capper on Twitter. Again, NBC's Bet the Edge podcast. What do you have on your schedule for the playoffs? Is there anything special on the deep dive pod?
We're going to do a lot of NBA content there, but nothing really formalized yet. It's going to be we're going to be NBA and NFL draft heavy for the rest of April, I think. We'll probably do one of each a week.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Nice.
And Matt, where can the people find you, man? What's going on so the people can find out your nightly Twitter live lines? I love it. I do love the nightly, hey, this is what's going on.
Drew's not gonna, he hasn't said anything here, but just the inferences here from Drew is suggesting that we need to get on a Cavaliers money line bet in this play-in game against the Nets. He was keeping that hope boat afloat there, right? He was
8.5. I'm satisfied with 8.5. Yeah, I'm satisfied with my 8.5.
Okay, all right. Well, bet plus 8.5, and then I will take the responsibility for a little smattering of the money line. I'll do so on Twitter at Emross Authentic. I should mention, guys, are we going to do Raps 20-1 to win the East? Like, is this not setting up nice?
No. Let's not get fair enough. Let's not get crazy here. Let's not get crazy.
Listen,
the season's already a dub for the Raps after the Tampa tank. Scotty Barnes. People are kind of like, "Who's Scotty Barnes? What's he going to do? We don't know." And then now you're in the playoffs, in the 5 seed. Like, that's already a dub. Already.
Fair enough. Yeah, man. Drew said, he's got a lot of NFL draft stuff too. Same here as well over at the Score. Obviously a couple weeks left in the hockey season as well, so piling into that. Just got through the Masters as far as the golf stuff is concerned, so I got to figure out who from there is going to play at Harbour Town this weekend and what that actually is going to look like, as it usually gets a little weird.
Are there azaleas there or no?
No azaleas. There is a cool lighthouse, and that's pretty much what they've got going on over at Harbour Town for this coming weekend. So yeah, everything that I do over there tweeted through at Emross Authentic on Twitter, and of course you can find it on the Score app, which everybody has on their phone already. Anyway.
Well, again, thanks guys for doing this, and hopefully we'll have you both on soon at some point during the NBA playoffs, which are sure to just be a great time. So hopefully you guys will join me again here on the DRF Sports Podcast. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, pal.
And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder. If you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. Of course, we got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.